Hello, and welcome to Leadership PRN. This is the Dalhousie Faculty of Medicine's leadership podcast for leaders across the spectrum of new to established. My name is Dr. Lara Hazelton, and I'm one of the co-directors of faculty development within the CPD offices. Today, I'm very pleased to have a guest, Dr. Jed Gonzalo. Hi, Jed.
Hi, Lara. Thank you so much for having me today.
Jed presented recently at the Fear Family Conference, which is one of the Faculty of Medicine's conferences on medical education. This year, there was a particular focus on leadership and systems change. And I really enjoyed your talk at that conference, Jed, and I'm really pleased that you've been willing to come speak with us today.
Yeah, Laura, I just want to extend my appreciation and gratitude for being invited. It was great to meet all the faculty and students during the visit, and it's just great to be here with you today.
Tell us about yourself and your interest in leadership.
I was born and raised in the coal mining country, if you will, of Pennsylvania. 3 of 4 of my grandparents were first-generation immigrants, came looking for the American dream in the U.S. and landed in the anthracite coal region of Pennsylvania. And I start there because that's really my roots, the genesis of who I am and my family, the fabric of teaming and people and community that came forth from where I was raised and brought up. And I think in many ways informs what I do on an everyday basis in my current job now. For some reason or other, I channeled towards medical education during my medical school days. There was something about seeing the differences that existed between medical education experiences on the clerkships, third-year clerkships I was seeing, and how I was seeing how medical education could make a difference, because I saw my classmate learning how to palpate the spleen and palpate the liver and listen to the heart, and they were percussing out the heart. And I was thinking, I'm not doing that on my rotation. And I began to see how education can impact the growth and professional development of individual students and student physicians, which got me into this box of, as it turns out, a leadership pathway in medical education, all the way to my current role now at the Virginia Tech Carilion School of Medicine in Roanoke, Virginia. So I think my roots of growing up in a community of tight-knit people and understanding medical education and pursuing that path, and now in a leadership position in medical education, they're intertwined to me like a thread. And I guess it comes back to values as well, that in medical education, I believe if you believe that medical education can significantly impact the lives of learners, that matters into their practice, that they can impact the lives of patients, then you can see the importance of leadership in that context, because leadership and change in medical education is critically important to make sure we're allowing our learners to learn the best they can, to have the greatest impact they can for a 30 or 40 or 50 plus year career.
So it sounds like the impact of medical education was what drew you to your current role. And can you tell us more about what that role is that you have?
Yeah, currently I'm the Senior Associate Dean for Medical Education at the medical school. There are 157 MD schools in the United States, and we are the 29th new medical school, which means we're not brand new, but we're in that second phase of new medical schools. We started in 2010, and I just started in this role in 2022. So we're entering that second chapter of the medical school. We are Virginia Tech Carilion. It's a public-private partnership between Virginia Tech as well as Carilion Clinic, which is an outstanding health system in Southwest Virginia. It's got a very large footprint. So our school and my role really is leading the education mission across all phases of predominantly UME, undergraduate medical education. So we're doing a lot of work in our curricular areas in phase 1, the pre-clerkship phase, the clerkship phase, and the post-clerkship phase. We've got an outstanding team of educators. We've got a wonderful community of students. We are on the smaller side. We have 49 medical students, which is in the lower percentiles of size for a U.S. medical school, but a wonderful place to learn, to practice, and also to be a professional in medical education. So I love my job.
And you mentioned about being a professional in medical education. Physicians often straddle two worlds, don't we? We straddle the the professional world of being an educator and being a practitioner as well.
It is kind of living in both worlds in many ways. I go to clinic. I'm in clinic with the residents. Next week, I'll be in clinic all week with the residents. Last week, I was on service, the inpatient medicine service, with 3 residents and 2 medical students caring for 12 or 13 patients. But in between, I'm intermixing it with my medical education work. And it's such a privilege to be able to be caring for patients, working with learners at that bedside, and then bring it back into the classroom. Yesterday, I was in the classroom. We were working on concept maps on cardiogenic shock and hypotension and tachycardia. And to see the students go through that, the mechanisms, the basic science mechanisms of an atherosclerotic plaque and a platelet plug and ischemia, but then to also remind them that it's one thing to be learning about it in the book or on paper. But hey, I just experienced this with a patient 5 days ago. Let me tell you how this actually played out. And it's just a privilege to help them grow on their journey to be a really great doctor.
I've heard you speak about professional identity and system citizenship. And it seems like the professional identity part is something that you're quite interested in. How do you explain these concepts maybe for people listening to this podcast who are not familiar with what professional identity and system citizenship are?
I've been fortunate enough the last 10 years or so to be involved in the work of health system science, which we have coined as the third pillar of medical education, one that complements the basic and the clinical sciences. In European med ed, Canada, the US, over the past 100 years, really it's worked off the dyad of basic sciences, learn the core mechanisms, the concepts, go into a clinical setting and see them applied. And you need the clinical reasoning, the diagnostics, and the therapeutics. But what medical education has seen the past even 50, 70 years is the need to be thinking holistically and broadly around the competencies that also meet the patients where they have their needs, where the health system has its own needs. So up sprang health system science as the third pillar of medical education, one that includes core concepts such as high-value cost-conscious care, patient safety, quality improvement. How do we team interprofessionally in clinical microsystems to help the patient who I just mentioned before with myocardial infarction? How do we help that patient team around nutrition, dietetics, to physical therapy, to outpatient primary care physicians, and link it all together? Health system science the substance has been around for almost over 100 years, all the way back to the origin of med ed. But medical education, in many ways, wasn't able to codify it and crystallize it in a way into the curricular areas. And I think that's what the last 10 years has allowed us to do, is to say the basic and clinical sciences are critically important. Health system science and these core concepts and competencies balance and synergize with the basic and clinical science, really to make this holistic whole of an individual, of a physician. And that's what gets us to this idea of professional identity as a system citizen. Physicians, we don't function, by the way, any interprofessional clinician, we don't function in independent silos. We function in teams. We are functioning and working embedded within a clinical environment where there's patients and units and nurses and pharmacists. So we can't just bring our diagnostics and therapeutic skills to the table alone. They are absolutely critically important. But we're also part of this larger country of healthcare, if you will. And that's what sprang forth the idea of a citizen, a system citizen, one who does all the diagnostics, therapeutics, the basic and clinical sciences really, really well. That goes nowhere. But it's also one who understands that their role is part of this larger interdependent system with interprofessional clinicians, understanding patients, for example. I'll give you an example of social determinants of health, which has been around in medical education for several decades. But the idea of the system citizen is saying, hey, it's not aspirational for us to be thinking or addressing or assessing for the patient's 20 plus social determinants of health that impact their health outcomes. It's part of our role. It's part of our identity as a physician to be considering, do they live in a food desert? Do they have access to the medications that we just prescribed post myocardial infarction at the time of discharge? We're trying to shift that identity, not us. It's already happening for several decades, to say, hey, we're part of this larger team. And that's what sprang forth this concept of system citizen and in the context of professional identity.
As you say, some of this has been around for a while, some of these ideas, and there's been movement on it, incorporating it into the curriculum. But I think there's still some challenges around how to teach it, how to integrate it. What are your thoughts about why it's been perhaps slower than it might have been, given how long we've had conversations about some of these topics?
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful question. And I laughed a little bit as you asked it, because I never would have thought going into this area of work 10, 12 years ago that a third of the work that we have been doing is really around the change management of health system science or system citizenship. Students, if you look at least in U.S. medical education, if you look at how well students rally behind it, there's a group of students who are all for it. They're totally with it. There's a group in the middle who I would term maybe they are mixed. And there's a group of students who say, look, this is not what it means to be a physician. And then you carry that forward to the current day faculty members who are the ones, the engine of learning with our students or residents, that the same curve might apply there too. Those who totally understand it and see it, those who might be in the middle, and those who say, look, I wasn't brought up this way. I wasn't educated in this paradigm. I'm fine. And we need to be independent, sovereign physicians. And I'm being a little pointed because not many physicians will say that. But we live in this change management context that have a lot of challenges. What's the definition? What do we actually mean when we say talk about these systems principles or systems thinking? Our faculty or our residents or our mentors, those who are coaching our learners, do they have the skills to do it? How do we accurately assess in a reliable and valid way the skills and competencies of health system science, in addition to 5 or 10 other core priority areas that we need to continue to work on? It's a change management journey that is remarkably complex. I will say, though, that I have seen significant strides in the past 10 years, even from when we started until now. Even the receptivity of the language of adopting even pilots or strategies. I think once individuals who might be mixed or neutral or maybe somewhat against it, once they hear what it is, once we talk to them and say, hey, you're coordinating a discharge right now in the inpatient service, or you're a surgeon and you're in the operating room, how does interprofessional collaboration, tell us about your teams in the operating room? And they'll be the first ones to say, yeah, we get good outcomes when we have a really good team. Here's how the team bonds. Here's how we norm and form around meeting the patient's needs or addressing the patient's transition. So I think one of the largest challenges, which maybe is the easiest, is truly understanding what we're talking about. What's being talked about in system citizenship is not necessarily developing policy skills for things that are outside of the patient's domain. 100% of health system science and system citizenship is right there in the room with patients and helping them meet their best outcomes, that the needs that they have to achieve health. And I think once those discussions, that healthy dialogue happens, very few people have I met are not for the development of that type of professional identity.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about how the language of quality improvement seems to me to have been an effective way to interest people or engage people that might not otherwise have been drawn to discussions about policy or even advocacy. There seems to be something about the idea that the patient or the system that they're working in is going to be the focus and that it's about improvement and better outcomes. There seems to be something about that seems to engage people.
I totally agree, Lara, that the quality improvement, the way, I think even that is sometimes mixed by the receptivity. I'm remembering my days in residency where the residency I went to had a significant quality improvement frame, and it was mixed by the residents. There was a lot of positive, but there was some at the other end who thought, I just want to be a doctor. I want to be able to navigate through these things. There should be a QI team that comes and does all this stuff. And I think they're clumped together in this larger box of saying, you may not need to be the master quality improvement expert, but as a system citizen, we need to be able to contribute to, assess, acknowledge, and when appropriate, contribute to the teaming of quality improvement or any one of the other health systems principles. But totally right. When you use the patient language, which is really what the substance is of all the work, it resonates, because I have, if ever, met anybody in healthcare who's not interested in trying to help patients meet their best health outcome.
How can physicians become better citizens of the systems in which they are situated?
The first comment I'll make there is that, and I'm pulling from some of the resistance I have felt on this journey the past 10 years, is that the system itself needs to help the clinicians be able to engage in it. So it's not a unidirectional of physicians or clinicians, whichever context we're using, it's all on them to be pursuing or developing the competencies or skills. There's a lot of things that we would need to be able to do that. So for example, if you're a primary care physician working 9 half days a week, and your other half day is meant on administrative tasks or patient follow-up, et cetera, you need time to be able to develop skills or contribute to initiatives that might improve wait times for dermatology referrals or telehealth referrals. Like, you need time as a system citizen to be able to invest in that. And that comes through this co-production with the health system, for example, to be able to do those things. So I just want to acknowledge that it's not on one person's onus to devise the plan and implement that plan, where it's part of this larger country, if you will, that relies upon multiple moving, multifaceted parts. When it comes to the individual, I think there are a number of things: raising awareness, seeking to understand what it truly is. And I think most already do, to be honest. It's part of their everyday job. Developing or honing those skills. Hey, I don't know enough about transferring a patient to this skilled nursing facility. What services are provided there? Can I ensure this safe transfer to the skilled nursing facility? How can I close the gap on not knowing what that is? Even asking the question. Let's talk about the services that are there. Maybe it's a tour to that skilled nursing facility, because we're going to discharge 10 more patients there in the next 3 months. There's things that we can do, but raising awareness, developing those skills. If we're in a leadership position, just to tie it back, I think there's a lot of strategies we can employ to change that narrative. If we're a division chief or a department chair or a clinical lead or a medical educator, culture changes when the narrative changes. It's something my mentor has taught me in the past. So the narrative in a division meeting or a team meeting, maybe there's a check-in on one of these concepts. Hey, how are we doing with this part in the curriculum? Or do our outcomes or do our competencies reflect what we really want in health system science or system citizenship? So I guess my meta point, Lara, is that I'm not sure that it needs to be this huge change. There might be more focused things that we can do in our everyday work that are very finite, need not take a full hour, that begin to change the dialogue as the first entry point into creating this mutual shared understanding as to what we're really doing.
I love that quote, culture changes when their narrative changes. I think that's a great quote. Who said that? Somebody that you worked with?
Yeah. One of my longtime mentors, Dr. Paul Haydett. He's at the Penn State College of Medicine. Wonderful individual, wonderful physician, wonderful educator. Always sharing words of wisdom with me. But it's always resonated since the time he shared that with me.
So would you see part of what you try to do about changing the narrative and then the culture change flowing out of that?
Yeah, I would say that's spot on. And I think, as for everybody listening, all of us are leaders in some way or another, whichever context that might be in. And I think it's even now, as I talk it through, have I done enough? Have I done enough reflective practice on myself, on how I interact or how I lead a meeting or how I'm contributing in someone else's meeting or our team meeting about whatever the goal is. In this context, system citizenship or helping learners develop some of the systems competencies or skills. And I think if we continually demonstrate this growth mind in trying to lead by the example or our words, then culture, I think, may change with time. And you can see it happen. You bring it up in 2 or 3 meetings, and then you're out of meeting, and then you read the meeting minutes, and then they picked up the ball, and they're also talking about it in that next meeting and say, that's awesome. And in fact, the same mentor, I'm sorry, he has shared so many pearls with me, but he said, Jed, the success of the work is when you're no longer there and everybody around you has taken it on their own. And so it's not relying upon you. It's not linked with you at all. It's actually part of the air that we're breathing in that culture.
There's a quote I like, if you want to understand something, try to change it. That's, to me, one of the truths about change management. And as you said, so much of this is not just about recognizing the importance of these things, but how do we actually shift the narrative, shift the culture. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary of even the role that I took in my former place 10 years ago. But for any of us who are leading change, once you get into it and you think it's going to be great, we're innovating or we're changing, we're evolving, it's going to be fantastic. But in reality, there's always a dip. There's always a set of challenges that exist. And the success and that upslope of getting to a better horizon, I think in many ways is reflective of our leadership and our resiliency and the teams that we're working with. The teams are so critically important, but that comment resonates.
Thank you so much for speaking with us today. These are very thought-provoking concepts and definitely something to reflect on as we try to change the systems we work in and develop citizenship in our learners.
Again, I just want to extend my appreciation. So thank you so much for having me.
And that's another episode of Leadership PRN. If you have a topic you would like to hear discussed or somebody you think I should speak to, please reach out to me at lara.hazelton@dal.ca or lara.hazelton@nshealth.ca. Until next time, take care.